Allman in the morning. Common Sense Radio.
Yes, it is. It's 7:10, and the weather is tricky out there, so be very, very careful. Want to get immediately to Senator Claire McCaskill, who is in St. Louis. Senator McCaskill, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jamie.
So where do we begin here? Let's see. I'm going to begin with this question.
Okay.
You're flying around on this gigantic, beautiful airplane, and you're flying around a lot, actually, and you are essentially crusading for transparency, responsibility, maybe even more taxes on the part of the rich. And there's nobody in your campaign, not you, not anybody else, who wonder as they are sitting in the aircraft, flying around the aircraft, deboarding, boarding, I wonder if we've taken care of the property taxes on this thing. How does that happen?
You know, you can imagine how many times I've asked myself that. To say the least, this has been a very, very rough week. And the simple answer is I made a huge mistake in assuming that it had been taken care of, partly because of the transparent nature of it. The plane was on the public record. Obviously, property tax records are a public record. And I guess, I just assumed that somebody who would have responsibility for this in my husband's organization had taken care of it. And on top of that, I since learned that the hangar space we had before we acquired this plane was in Illinois. And Illinois, like most states, don't have this tax. There is no personal property tax on airplanes in Illinois or in Kansas and in the majority of the states in this country. So I wrongfully assumed that someone had checked. I wrongfully assumed that it had been done, and that's why this is such a huge mistake on my part. I shouldn't have ever made those assumptions, and I'm paying a very high price for it, which I should.
Well, now, especially since you and Tom Coburn in February co-sponsored a bill which would demand that federal employees keep up to date on their taxes or risk being issued a pink slip. And clearly you would consider yourself to be a federal employee, right?
Absolutely. And the bill, I think, is an appropriate bill, but I would point out that the bill is meant to deal with federal employees who have been acknowledged that they owe the tax and refuse to pay it. This is a little different. 55 months in a row, the plane was paying sales tax to the state of Missouri. The government was very aware of this plane because they received a form every month from the plane remitting sales tax to the state. And, of course, that money was then remitted onto the county. And, of course, the reason the county got this sales tax, the personal property tax money, is because after the mistake was made as to one billing on one trip, I took it upon myself to look at everything. And immediately when I realized that this was a problem, it took 4 or 5 days for us to begin to comb through everything, and that's when I realized this. That's when it surfaced that this has happened. We immediately came forward and paid what we estimated to be the appropriate taxes for the 4 years. As it turned out, what we paid was more than the taxes were for the 4 years, but of course we hadn't paid the interest and late fees yet, and so there still will be one additional payment.
Now, do you own both Time Saver LLC and Sunset Cove Associates LLC?
No, the plane, and this, I know more about this now, obviously. The Time Saver owns the plane, but Sunset Cove has what's called a triple net lease, and under the law, all rights and obligations of ownership fall to the triple net lease. And I have a small percentage of Sunset Cove. So here's what's odd about this is because President Obama's campaign reports show that they made out a check to Sunset Cove Associates for $3,900 for basically a trip that you took to South Carolina to campaign for him. The Obama campaign paid $3,900. Now, a couple of questions I have there is, first of all, how could it possibly, first of all, cost $3,900 for an airplane trip from D.C. or St. Louis to South Carolina? And how weird is it that President Obama basically then
chartered a plane that you already own so that you could ride in it to South Carolina to campaign for him?
Well, I think that the simple explanation is that when someone is campaigning on someone else's behalf in the federal system, they either have to in-kind a contribution for what they are doing for them, or the campaign must pay for it. There is no other alternative. And so the compliance people at the Obama campaign wanted a bill for whatever it was going to cost me to fly there. And since the charter cost for our plane was significantly lower than other charter services available in Missouri, and I can't remember right at this moment, I'm happy to let you know where I flew from. But it's a requirement that you do that. That, for example, Robin Carnahan flew on the plane one time, and we were required to in-kind her campaign.
Right, but $3,900, that's a lot of money, especially when, I mean, you obviously have an interest in Sunset Cove. So how do you guys determine how much money somebody's going to pay you? And clearly the government did reimburse you for flights on this. Did the government reimburse you at that kind of high level of cost for an airplane ride?
Let me just say that I'm sure that there was more than one stop involved in that flight. And secondly, my charter costs, which I have reimbursed to the government because I understand how it looks, my charter costs are approximately 1/4 of the charter costs of Senator Bond during the same period of time. I spend an average around $20,000 a year, whereas Senator Bond spent usually $100,000 or more on charter costs just around the state of Missouri. Charter costs are very high. Sunset Cove charged the exact same rate no matter who was using the plane. There was not a different rate for us when we were using it personally, or when it was leased to anyone else, or when the Obama campaign was paying the bill, or when the bill was submitted to the federal government. It was exactly the same cost. So, and as charter rates go, it was reasonable and frankly less expensive than the alternatives available in Missouri.
The only problem with the contention that there might have been more stops to South Carolina would be that there's a mechanism by which a person can find that out, and there's a website that you have the tail number on the website. You have the tail number. You go to the website, you can find out where that plane goes and where that plane has been.
Well,
Sunset Cove Associates
let me just say,
said no, they don't want anybody to know.
Stops were made on the Obama, but there was a flight around Missouri that took 3 days that was significantly higher than that, and I'm happy to delineate what the costs are. It's a flat cost per hour, and I'm sure it had to do with me having to go. I don't know. I'd have to look at the flight to figure out exactly what we did on that flight.
Now, you know what else you guys need to check on is whether or not you actually have the certificate or the license from the FAA to actually provide that airplane for compensation or hire. You guys know that, right? You have to have a separate. Do you guys have one?
We have. We do not charter. We dry lease. So when people use the plane, they pay separately for the plane and the airplane.